coming along to this. I have to say, for a confident frontman of a goth punk band, and I've been doing this for years, I'm just this much nervous. I've never done anything like this before, and thank you so much to Ryan and all his team and this beautiful place in this beautiful town for allowing me to do this. And it's important that I do this from a selfish kind of commercial point of view, because I'm bringing out a book. It should be out in the new year sometime. I can't put an exact date on it, about the history of Ausgang. At one point, somebody else was going to write this story, and then a number of people over a few years had been suggesting that, well, Mark, why don't you do it, because you were there, and you've got your own voice, you can string two words together, so why don't you do it? And I got back to the guy who was originally going to write the story of Ausgang, and I said, is it okay if I take it away from you? He said, yeah, go ahead, man. Anyway, he's contributed to the book, so he gets his look in as well. Just to give it some context, it's a book, and it's called Ausgang Dark Matters. It's essentially a book about Ausgang, obviously, but it's also got some autobiographical elements in it. I mean, how could it not have those, because I'm writing it, right? But it's also got some surrealist stream of consciousness elements to it, because, and I know this sounds like I'm beating my breast, but I can write, I can string two words together, and I wanted to express myself creatively within the book. Also, I knew what I didn't want to do. You lot have probably read as many rock and roll autobiographies as I have, and most of them are pretty good. A whole lot of them are really awful, and what they tend to do is rely on the same old cliches of sex and drugs and rock and roll, and you could probably interchange the names and it would be the same story. And I thought, of course there was sex and drugs and rock and roll in Ausgang's story, but is there another way of telling that story? And actually I think there is, and actually I think I've done it, but of course, who knows, it might bomb when it comes out. But I think it's succeeded in that I've attempted to write a rock and roll autobiography in a slightly different way. What I'm going to do here is read an extract. I mean, when I was trying this out on my girlfriend Jackie back home, I stood there and she was sitting as if she was you. And I ripped through it in about 15 minutes, and she said, yeah, Mark, that was fine, but slow down. So this should take about 20 minutes. I hope that's not too long for you. If you've got any questions afterwards, then I would love to have a chat with you. If it's kind of like tumbleweed going through here, then I'll just head for the red wine and you won't see me again. I'm out of here. To give this chapter, it's not a whole chapter, it's part of a chapter, and to give it some context, it's chapter 9, and if you know anything about Ausgang at all, you'll know that Ausgang was born out of the ashes of a previous band called Kabuki. We only had one single, I'm a Horse, which we still do, and by the way, here are my guys over here. Victor, the drummer.
Your horses.
And Jacob, our bass player. Matthew, our guitarist, has had to go home. He's got something on tomorrow. And so it's not the whole chapter, as I say. It's just an edited version from that chapter. It's actually chapter 9, so there's a whole host of other stuff leading up to this. And this is where Kabuki have just finished, and Ausgang have just been born, and we have yet to choose a name. Each chapter in the book is named after a very, very cool song or book that is close to my heart. And this chapter is called Sex Beat, and that is a Gun Club song. But the subtitle of the chapter is Ausgang Part 1. So that's enough rambling. I'm just going to go for it, and I will try and slow down. There will be a point where I'm going to get kind of expressive and stream of consciousness, where I am going to deliberately speed up, but that's a stylistic, kind of affectation, if you will. So, here we go. Matthew, Cub, Ibo and I were prowling Birmingham's grubby streets. And, scowling. We didn't know how to smile. Our social skills were next to nothing, we felt. alien. But we did know what we really needed, a new name. Something that conjured up an outlaw or gang vibe, because we were that original, right? I hit upon Outgang, which, if it wasn't so obvious, I think it's actually a pretty good name. And guess what? Again, in Dawkins' book, I've referenced Dawkins' book earlier on in the book, The Ancestor's Tale, I learned that back in 1658, a picture by Bontius of an orang-outang appeared in some textbook or other. Outgang? Outang? You have to admit that's beyond spooky. So, our second orangutan mention, surely there couldn't be a third, could there? Anyway, Ibo, our drummer, had a German girlfriend, and she said it sounded like the German word Ausgang. Intrigued, we asked what that meant. Exit or way out. It seemed to fit on a number of levels. Out there, the other, leaving this mortal coil, or maybe just town. It also evoked one of my favourite books, Last Exit to Brooklyn, by Hubert Selby Jr. Look it up. And yes, it had the word gang in there. What was not to like? I think it's amusing that bands attach so much importance to choosing a name, but we all do, don't we? I mean, later it becomes irrelevant what a band is called, and the names suddenly appear a little silly and completely unconnected to the music they're accompanying. Oasis, Blur, they're pretty beige, mundane words, right? But at the time, we stress and worry about any unwanted connotations that might be brought to bear on our beloved choices. We started rehearsing with a new manic vigour, and almost immediately underground rumblings could be heard across the city about those kabuki kids going through some dark change. Matthew, I remember it all being very quick because we had to write a whole brand new set. We didn't want to play old kabuki songs, I Am a Horse, My Hair, or anything. There was another great Birmingham Wednesday night alternative disco at the time that was a must for any self-respecting creature of the night, operating out of a city centre club called the Powerhouse, formerly the Locarno, where incidentally I first met Joanne, who was the backing singer in Kabuki, at one of their alternative events in 1979. A cool mid-range venue that also featured live bands from time to time. They gave us the opportunity to flex our newfound, lean, scarred, twitching muscles on September 28, 1983. And that's when everything really changed. The place was rammed. I mean, it would have been without us there. It always was. But that was its beauty. We had this huge captive audience trapped with nowhere to go if they didn't like it. Well, they could walk out, but we'd have liked to have seen them try. Anyway, that was never going to happen. We knew what we had, and it was just waiting for them, simmering, writhing. And guess what? Yeah, we were awesome. That place erupted as we nuked the venue and reaped the rewards of being the now big thing. The very next day, just as our ears were recovering from the blistering on-stage sound, we were still ringing in everyone else's too. The word was out. A new, grotesque, twisted force of nature was abroad. We were so cool it almost hurt. We went everywhere together. We looked even more like a band than we did before, but like no band you'd ever come across. Not in this city anyway. It oozed from somewhere deep inside us and spilled out onto the filthy, relentlessly rain-sodden streets. Where was everyone else that were meant to be on the same page as us? We couldn't be the only ones, could we? Sure, we displayed our punk credentials. There were studs and spray-painted slogans and images on our leather biker jackets, on items of clothing scored from the Oasis and rag markets and various thrift stores, but we were wringing the look out of shape. It may not seem like anything nowadays where everything has been done and nothing is new or shocking, but that big hair we had, now even bigger. Those tattoos, those bits of our bodies we pierced, all contributed to our signature look, a result of lying under needles, poking holes in our skin, and yes, dyeing, crimping, backcombing and spraying that bloody hair. We alone were responsible for the current state of the planet's ozone layer. Guilty as charged. I'm surprised we haven't been arrested, tried and convicted for crimes against humanity. All of this contributed to the feeling that we had the city by the scruff of its neck, and it was only going to be a matter of time before the rest of the UK followed. Of course, a lot of people didn't like us, resenting the fact that these arrogant, snotty, punky peacocks were striding around as if they owned the place. But that was to be expected. In fact, we secretly wanted it as much as we wanted to be adored. We almost demanded it. You knew you had something if reactions to you were polarised, deep love or deep hate, nothing in between. And the fact is, no one expects much chart music to elicit such emotions. This was especially true in the 80s. It's almost always uniformly bland. There are exceptions, of course. The 70s represented a good example of the charts being awash with fabulously cool tunes. But when it comes to underground or alternative music, we should expect the boat to be pushed out. And of course, for the most part, it is. But I remember being struck how, in the 80s, even music coming out of the counterculture seemed a little tame. To me, of the relatively newer bands at the time, only the likes of the Gun Club and the Birthday Party stuck out like beautiful sore thumbs. We certainly didn't feel any musical kinship with any of our other contemporaries. For a while, given the absence of the internet and mobile phones, we didn't even know they existed. We really thought we were out there on our own, mixing punk, glam, rock and blues for our own personal enjoyment and anyone else who was on remotely our wavelength. That powerhouse show created such a buzz about the band that our second gig came only 3 weeks later, October 20, another big one. This time the support to those renowned glammy poodles Hanoi Rocks. At the huge Tower Ballroom, we had absolutely zero in common with the headliners. You only had to look at the two bands standing side by side to realise that. And they were pretty snooty towards us, to boot. But these were the days before the onset of genteel, mutual appreciation, love, respect and romance between first and sloppy seconds on the bill. But none of that mattered. We tore that venue apart and once more went down a raging storm and had everyone eating out of the palm of our dirty little hands. Our reputation was sealed. Ausgang was boss. And get this, our third show, just 8 days later, again at a big venue, Digbeth Civic Hall, another major support slot. The first we knew about it was when we picked up a flyer in a record store a couple of weeks previously for a show Sex Gang Children were playing. Support was shown as being Ausgang. We bristled. Another band with the same name. Furious, we called the promoters, but during the course of the conversation we discovered that it was indeed us. Don't ask me how we were booked for a gig without us even knowing about it. I mean, can you imagine that happening nowadays? It just wouldn't. But from their end, band, agent and promoters all recognised that Sex Gang Children would totally benefit from having such a cool, new, local outfit supporting them. Not only to bring along extra punters, but who also appeared to belong to a new emerging scene, whatever that was. So bang, it was on. There was a palpable, very real tension present in the hall that night. Sex Gang Children had an already existing loyal following who, for whatever reason, seemed to display some antagonism, not only to us, but to our people. That didn't bother us. We took it in our stride. We killed everyone in the audience and we buried their bodies at the back of the venue. We were that good. The show was also favourably reviewed in the New Musical Express the following week by Neil Taylor, which meant that, as predicted, we were now becoming known outside our local area, and it was this show that made us realise that there were actually other like-minded bands out there who may not sound like us, but who were definitely on the same page and had a similar interest or background to ourselves. We'd already earned a reputation for putting on pretty explosive shows. It came naturally to us. In no way did we ever have to force it. We considered it to be a vitally important aspect of playing live. We didn't attend other bands' gigs just to be serenaded to. We wanted action, something to watch as well as to hear. Otherwise, you might as well stay at home and listen to the records, right? Thus, we applied this way of thinking to our own performances. It wasn't worked out in advance, there was nothing deliberate about it, it was all very much in the moment, because we knew people had parted with hard-earned cash to come and see us. We were going to make sure they witnessed a real spectacle. Early fan, Paul Craddock. You were always in for a good night at an Ausgang gig. You could go and dance your arse off for a couple of quid and have a laugh. Fantastic times. Interestingly, in terms of there being a scene, although there was a coming together of different bands and their fans, there was also that rivalry I just hinted at. Mark Farmer remembers when we supported Sex Gang Children at another show in Coventry. Steve and I were getting a good bantering from Sex Gang fans, being called Ausgang fuckers! I mean, woo! I miss those days. See what I mean? It's just like the early punk years. There was tribalism, for good or ill. That has all but disappeared today. I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing, but it's interesting that despite all the myriad forms of music these days, and the countless musicians and bands out there, there appears to be more of a homogeneous nature to fans of music. And I include myself in that comment. I think it's got something to do with getting older. However, on the plus side, even amongst the younger generations, I think there's more of a sophistication about consuming music of late, an ease of investigating the influences behind your favourite artists, and the realisation that if you love music, you're going to dig a whole cross-section of it. I remember seeing a thread on Facebook where Ausgang was mentioned, and one armchair gunslinger let both barrels loose with a memory of meeting us backstage when we supported Alien Sex Fiend at Nottingham's Rock City, and recalling us being arrogant fuckers, really thought they were something. Funnily enough, this almost exactly the same sentiment was expressed by an outfit called Cry of the Innocent in a sounds piece by Johnny Waller in 1983, where the band mentioned Kabuki. We met them the other day. They're really arrogant. They really think they're something. Was it the same person? Anyway, as mentioned earlier, they were probably right. We were a bit sniffy in those days. It wasn't an act as such, but as far as we were concerned, attitude was all important. Didn't all bands think like this? No? Well, they should. Everyone was trying to carve out their little niche. Surely it's always been this way. You may be pals with that band over there, but you put yourself first, right? This doesn't mean that you tread on somebody else just to get where you want to be, but shouldn't healthy competition be the norm? We certainly remember an early graffiti war between Kabuki and the previously mentioned Echo Bass. You could find both names spray painted on any available wall throughout the city. Apparently, according to various sources, we hated each other. But, we'd never met. And of course, when we did meet, we inevitably became best mates and collaborated on that charity show mentioned in a previous chapter. So, even though we now realise we were unwittingly part of a scene that initially we weren't too keen on being members of, it was in its infancy and it still retains some of those negative punk vibes. For instance, when we supported our buddies GBH at Digbeth Civic Hall again, there was some rather lively toing and froing between the fans of the two bands, including gobbing from the GBH fans. Our people didn't indulge in this gross act, and we wouldn't have stood for it if they did, which quite possibly was meant for us. But it didn't reach the stage, and it ended up on the backs of jackets and the gorgeously backcombed hair of our fans. They were none too pleased. I don't blame them. After the music press proposed and coined the short-lived positive punk movement, actually when you analyse that, it wasn't that bad of a name, given the out-and-out negativity of the first wave of punk. In the first wave of post-punk new wave, they were clearly looking for something else to pin yet another label on it and then claim they were ahead of the game in recognising it. Goth was it. Which is fine if you've already got used to names being minted at every new turn in music. Let's see, what have we got here? Folk, blues, rock and roll, rockabilly, rhythm and blues, jazz, soul, reggae, funk, ska, prog rock, glam, disco, heavy metal, punk, new wave, hip-hop, grunge, dubstep, garage, grime, blah blah blah. But goth? In a sense, from a musical and fashion perspective, it was exactly the same as positive punk, just a few weeks down the line. I suppose it too was an okay moniker, given the doom-laden vibes and songs like Bauhaus's 1979 Bela Lugosi's Dead. But if you play that alongside Adam and the Ants' debut album Dirt Wears White Socks, The Boys Next Door, 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 and the Gun Club's Fire of Love, by the way, the first two records released in 1979, the third in 81, you start to realise that this whole scene, this dark post-punk scene, was very diverse and meant something worlds apart from 1st century Polish tribes, 12th century European architecture and 18th century literature. If anything, it became obvious that goth was really connected to the look of bands and fans involved, rather than any musical style, as all the outfits sounded vastly different. Nothing surprising there then. This has been the case with all youth subcultures. And I'd argue that this look was simply an organic evolution from punk anyway, as was a lot of the music, which I further contend could almost be traced back to one individual and her band. Guess who? Susie and the Banshees, especially the Morris McKay model. In fact, although we could waste a great deal of time pointing to a variety of 60s and 70s artists and records that displayed some spooky or Byron-esque element, and then sift through all those post-punk bands, singles, albums and claim, there, that was the beginning of goth, I'm going to stick my neck out and suggest that the Banshees' The Scream, 1978, has got to be a contender. And as for where, geographically, this all started in the UK, really, who gives a fuck? Not me. The whole north-south thing is a bit childish, isn't it? A tad obvious? I could easily make a convincing case for it starting in alternative Birmingham nightclubs, but I won't, because that would be ridiculous. The fact is, goth nights were never named as such until much, much later. They naturally grew out of the alternative or Bowie nights, which in turn grew out of punk nights. Up and down the country, kids, including me, because I was a DJ in those days, were doing the same kind of thing without necessarily having any knowledge of somebody else getting on with it elsewhere. This has happened in all aspects of life, in all cultures, in all societies throughout history. No mystery. Throughout the UK, the likes of Ausgang, March Violets, Flesh for Lulu, Play Dead were all but taking over the underground music scene. I maintain musically there's nothing sonically that links any of those bands. Certainly we felt no any connection whatsoever. But there was something in the look and the attitude we all presented that described some kind of kinship. Besides, all of this is ignoring the similar rumblings going on in the rest of Europe and the US at the same time. Certainly much later, when Ausgang reformed, our experiences confirmed that that whole goth scene is far healthier in those territories than in the UK. So, were Ausgang goth? Are Ausgang goth? If you'd have asked us back then, we'd have said no way. But that was the answer that you were going to get from all the bands associated with the scene at the time, I guarantee it. Whereas, in fact, we probably all were goth. If, by goth, you're talking about wearing, are you ready? Aubrey Beardsley, Surrealist, Beat Poet, Dadaist, John Hartfield, William Burroughs, Tennessee Williams, Francis Bacon, Captain Beefheart, Marlon Brando, Velvet Underground, Tom Wolfe, MC5, Stooges, Bowie, T-Rex, Roxy Music, A Clockwork Orange, Joe Orton, Charles Bukowski, Hunter S. Thompson, Glam, New York Dolls, Richard Hell, Patti Smith, Kathy Acker, US, UK Punk, Banshees, Dirt Wears White Socks era, Adam and the Ants, Erotica in all its forms, Birthday Party, Gun Club, et al. Influences on our collective sleeves. See what I mean? Those were my particular influences that I brought to bear on Ausgang, and I very much doubt I was the only one. Of course, these days goth means a whole heap more, but it still includes that list above, which is in no way exhaustive, by the way. Personally, I can't quite stretch to the whole upside down crosses, pentagrams and Satanism thing. They're just the flip side of accepted organised religions and thus indicators of yet more dogma. But for some people, they're in there too. Whilst we're on this subject, does anyone else find it odd that so many writers and lyricists, even from those that claim they're atheist, quote from the Bible or any other religious tone for that matter. It's not as if these things are well written, or poignant, or deep, despite being penned by so many different people over such long periods of time. One might give something like the Bhagavad Gita a break, I guess, but only because it feels very surreal with its technicolor characters and set pieces. It kind of resembles an acid trip. None of these works are exactly the collected volumes of Shakespeare, Burroughs, Southern, or Woolf, are they? Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah. If you ask the same question now, for fuck's sake, Ausgang, are you goth? The answer is, of course we are. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry if that went on and on a bit, but it gives you a flavour of the book. I'm trying to paint a picture of what it was like at the time. And by the way, that's Ausgang forming. And then there was a whole heap of time after we split up in 1987. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff about what I got up to after that. And then there's the period where we reformed in the early 2000s. And there's a bunch of stuff that goes on after that, and then I bring it bang up to date when we reformed Ausgang, number 3, and it goes right up to date, and it will be right up to date until the book is published. So, for instance, our experience in Denver and Colorado Springs is going to be in the book. You're all going to be in my book, because when I get home, I'm going to be putting this experience into the book, because it hasn't gone to the printers at the publishers yet. So,
hell yeah.
Good. So, if you want to chat about anything, I'm available. Please buy Emily's art. Please, then, buy my art. And please buy all the remaining Ausgang merch that is out on the table. And please buy all of Ryan's stuff in the shop. I mean, all of it. Wipe it out. Thank you.